Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. The world's now watched the first and possibly only presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Well, they answered the moderators as to why they feel they belong in the White House again. Many voters ended the night with more questions, some specific to Connecticut. So we're going to answer those now. One thing on everyone's mind, those pocketbook policies. When we start getting into the nitty-gritty policy questions which impact your bottom line and household budget, we get all the questions about taxes. These candidates are talking a lot about them, but where do they actually differ? What would either leader in the White House mean for you? Well, it does come down to a pretty different way of seeing the economy and what stimulates it, ultimately making it better for you. Here's what we mean. Trump has on his record lowering the top personal tax rate and the top corporate tax rate. His administration operated on more of a trickle-down theory that savings for top earners and companies would pass all the way down eventually. Harris, on the other hand, though, wants to raise taxes on corporations, but then offer more tax deductions for small businesses. Her promise not to raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year. To do that, she said those earning over $1 million should pay more than they are now. A big question ahead of the debate and still coming out of it, how will your family be impacted by their obviously differing economic ideas? The child tax credit for federal filing has been a constant battle post-pandemic. Trump really hasn't come out with any position when it comes to child tax credit. His running mate, J.D. Vance, answered seemingly for both of them, floating an increase of $5,000 per child in an interview, but Trump hasn't actually endorsed that idea or agreed with it yet. Harris has very clearly said she wants to raise the child tax credit, bringing it back to pandemic-era levels. Notably, she wants a $6,000 credit specifically for new parents. People have obviously questioned where that money would come from. Harris's proposed increase would cost $1.2 trillion over 10 years. She'd cover it with that increase on corporate tax rates. No answers as to where the money would come from in a Trump administration. What about higher education? Well, not everyone agrees with forgiving student loans, but with more than 500,000 borrowers right here in Connecticut and a total student loan debt of more than $18.3 billion as of May, residents are wondering where the candidates fall on this one. While Harris is trying to reach out from under the Biden administration, she does back his original student loan forgiveness plan for tens of millions of borrowers. That's the one that's been held up in court because people think the president shouldn't and can't do that. Harris is likely to keep piecemealing parts of it, though, for different kinds of borrowers, as President Biden has already started doing. Trump opposes student loan cancellation, but he actually does agree with repayment plans which work with a person's income. Now, what about housing? It's a Connecticut crisis and national crisis. Residents and the state legislature have made a top priority. Before we get into the candidates' different proposals for home buying, let's talk about mortgages. You've probably heard Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac tossed around, two large companies under conservatorship by the government for the sake of buying and guaranteeing mortgages. If they weren't around, the market would be pretty unstable and even more affordable for homeowners. Fannie was first, Freddie came next. Fannie usually single-family mortgages, Freddie Mac historically larger multi-family holdings. During his time in the White House, Trump advocated for taking the government-sponsored enterprises out from conservatorship. He thinks it could mean more competition, possibly better options for you. But analysts say a move like that could just as easily raise mortgage costs and would come with a whole lot of risk. Harris isn't in favor of privatizing for two reasons. You'll hear her point from a Moody study from 2015 that calculated it could add up to $1,200 a year to a typical mortgage, hence why she's not for any changes there. Harris has already called for other major housing changes, though, making it one of her very first policy priorities. We've talked about on the show the general lack of housing and how that's made affordability seem like an impossible goal here in Connecticut. To stimulate development and stop the shortage, Harris wants 3 million homes by the end of her first term. The problem is the federal government has never really been able to move housing supply because zoning is so hyper-local. What she can and plans to do is roll out tax incentives for builders to create more starter homes and a tax credit for affordable unit projects. While economic experts say supply will be felt the most by people when it comes to prices, Harris has some direct-to-consumer promises, too. Expand the low-income housing tax credit and provide $25,000 to any first-time home buyers for their down payment, which comes back to trickle-down theory or middle-lower-class investment. She and others argue assistance like that will only come back to the economy tenfold. And what about those tariffs? How does Trump's focus on hitting other countries harder actually turn out for us here in Connecticut? Well, we actually have some idea. When Trump was first president, he implemented a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports. Most financial analysts calculate this was approximately a total of nearly $80 billion passed back on to the consumer. Now, Trump bragged during the debate Biden did keep those tariffs. He even added more, like a hike on Chinese goods especially. But the Biden administration did say it was necessary to bounce back post-pandemic. So it's not that either administration in the past or either candidate now doesn't agree with putting substantial tariffs on global imports. The difference is how extreme they want to go. Harris would likely only raise tariffs slightly, really prioritizing these don't start increasing consumer costs. Trump, however, has been clearer. He thinks the world needs to pay up. Not believing the revenue doesn't always mean savings for us, no matter what we've seen. His campaign proposal is a 10% hike on all U.S. imports and a bigger 60% tariff on any Chinese imports. When it comes to defense spending, with so many conflicts threatening to expand and more pressure on aid, let's talk about where the candidates stand here. Strictly speaking about overall defense spending and not any specific conflict, the Biden-Harris administration already proposed an $849.8 billion defense budget for the 2025 fiscal year. That's a 4.1% increase from 2023's enacted budget. President Trump in 2018 signed the largest Pentagon budget ever at $700 billion, a 15.5% increase from the year prior. Even though he's called for deep government spending cuts, he has also said he wants to keep up that level of defense spending. So if he does stick to both those convictions, he'd cut from domestic budget over defense. Obviously, Connecticut has a vested interest in the defense industry as it makes up a major portion of jobs and state revenue here. While we have aviation and other aspects, I want to particularly talk about AUKUS and the shipyards. Former President Trump has said since before even taking office the first time, he wants more submarines, something which would largely fall on Groton, but he wants more for less money. Electric Boat has already said they're overwhelmed, appreciating more work, but needing more resources. to end their legal limbo. He's working with local veterans who fought alongside these Afghans, recently adding the special forces to the list of those who would be granted safety, including the female tactical teams who've seen increasingly large threats. Speaking of Connecticut senators' work, earlier in the show, we spoke with Senator Chris Murphy, an architect of the now infamous Trump-killed Harris-backed bipartisan border bill. Of course, a lot to break down when it comes to the candidates' records and promises on immigration. We'll still be covering the different proposals more extensively in the coming weeks. To be clear, right now, though, the border is almost entirely closed. Biden's new executive action this summer allowed immigration officials to deport most migrants without processing their claims, and the temporary ban is in place until the number of crossings reaches a much lower level. Another common question as Kamala Harris tries to step out into her own spotlight with so little time. Lots of people wondering when it comes to her ideas, why didn't she get these things done already? She is in the White House. She's the current vice president. In fact, this is the hang-up that stopped most vice presidents from a successful promotion to higher office. That comes down to the congressional balance of power, their ability to actually pass presidential proposals and priorities. So when we question why certain things weren't done already, we have to keep in mind that all depends largely on this, particularly the House, as it certifies votes. The leadership there is currently Republican, record close to government shutdowns and passing a historically low number of bills. There's a real chance it could flip, though, in this election, Connecticut's own 5th district race integral to that outcome. And if you're wondering why Democrats are leaning in the Senate, 3 independents count for their seats. So yes, the president can set the tone and can use executive orders, but the makeup of Congress is really what ends up deciding how much presidents can get done and what gets done. The legislature also controls the president's purse strings, so all those budget items we talked about, that comes back to Congress too. Well, if you're looking to share or rewatch this episode or find out more voter details with just more than 5 weeks until early voting starts here in Connecticut, you can head to fox61.com or download the free Fox 61 News app. And of course, watch The Real Story live every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61 and streaming on Fox 61 Plus. Have a great morning.